Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very respected leader from the world of public relations, a former colleague from many years ago from Indonesia, from Vancouver, Canada, Rhea Dubois-Phillips. Rhea, welcome to the show.
Ashutosh, thank you so much. It's so wonderful to reconnect with you after all these years, and I'm honored to be part of this esteemed podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. Rhea is the founding partner of WinterCove Communications. She has over 2 decades at Edelman, the world's largest PR agency. She was named by one of business in Vancouver's most influential leaders in marketing, public and media relations in 2022. We're going to speak to Rhea today about public relations and investor relations. But Rhea, before we speak about PR, tell me about your own journey in brief.
Well, thank you, Ashutosh. It started back when I went to the Canadian Embassy in Washington, D.C., at a time when they were negotiating the very highly publicized North American Free Trade Agreement between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. And that was my real first foray into the world of media relations and stakeholder engagement. So it was fascinating to see how the messaging had to be prepared and pushed out to the media, the response, some issues management, of course, and at the time, General de Chastelain was our ambassador. He was a very experienced communicator. And I was just fascinated by the world of communication, of politics, of international relations at that time. It inspired me to go back to school and get a little more accreditation. I did a master's in English at the University of London in England. And I also did a diploma in French and French philosophy at the Sorbonne in Paris. Being educated was great, but I needed some work experience. And I decided to venture to Indonesia, which is where our paths crossed. And I joined Pacific Satellite Nusantara, which launched the very first satellite hand phone project for Asia. We launched that satellite. It was a career highlight for me to have something so exciting like that, but to be in the communication and share the story of that historic satellite launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, where we had partnered with the Russian Space Agency, Lockheed Martin from the US, Telesat Canada, as well as partners throughout Asia. It absolutely opened my eyes to international communication, stakeholder relations, a lot of crisis management. The satellite that went up before ours, as you'll recall, Ashutosh, exploded 4 seconds after takeoff. And so we had some very risky, intense moments on that platform, but it was very exciting. And from there, I continued on in communications. I joined Edelman Public Relations, which is the largest family-owned public relations agency in the world. Richard Edelman is still the CEO of that company and the son of the founder, Dan Edelman. It's based in New York. But luckily for me, they had offices all throughout Asia, and I was able to move around to different countries and continue my career with Edelman. I worked in Hong Kong, Thailand, Singapore, Korea, Japan, China, and my home base was predominantly Hong Kong for over 15 years.
Wow.
So it was a fascinating time getting used to different cultures, different ways of doing business, different communication styles. And it really broadened my mind to working in an international setting like that.
Well said, well said. So let's talk about public relations, Rhea, and communications. And you spent a very, very long time in this area, which is so highly specialized. From the time you started in Jakarta or Indonesia, how, in your view, has the landscape of PR evolved, especially with the advent of digital media?
Ashutosh, I couldn't even begin to articulate how different it is today from when I started 30 years ago. I remember being in Indonesia and having a friend contact me and say, there's a new platform called Skype, where if you download Skype, I'll be able to see you and we can communicate, through the computer. And that blew my mind. Well, fast forward, we are in a digital world where communication is instant, it's global. There are multi-platforms. It's a very, very crowded space. It's more challenging than ever to get messaging and brand awareness and build brand loyalty across different platforms. It's a very complex myriad of communication platforms now. And you have to be savvy to which one to use for which audience. And then also have a whole contingency plan for crisis and issues management, because back in the day, you might be assembled in person for an old-fashioned press conference, and you could talk things out face to face in real time. Now it's all digital, and there's no space, no time to correct for mistakes. It's a very unforgiving landscape now. So crisis and issues is a huge part of communication now, as people have to prepare for multiple scenarios when making, when developing their communication strategy.
Correct. Great response. Thank you. And what, in your view, Rhea, are some of the key components of an effective crisis communication strategy in today's fast-paced media?
Well, the number one most important component by far is preparation. You never want to be caught off guard for a crisis. And, I meet with a lot of leaders that feel they don't need to spend a lot of time, effort, money investing in a crisis communication plan because it'll never happen to me. It absolutely will. And there's so many elements of crisis communication for which leaders have to be prepared. Number one is assessing potential scenarios. Is it cybersecurity? Is it, and then are there actual, real life scenarios that could happen with your stakeholder groups?
Right.
So it's assessing the landscape and then preparing a crisis plan that can address each of those different scenarios. And then training your team. So if it's a larger group, executive board members, everybody needs to see the plan, be walked through it, as well as have mock scenarios. We do a lot of tabletop planning and tabletop scenarios with our clients where we walk them through, and everybody acts out what happens so that the chain of command is very clear, the chain of communication is clear, and there are no surprises on, when something happens, people are not panicking because they've gone through it several times.
Correct.
So I'd say preparation is number one. And then secondly, you have to respond quickly, and you have to respond with transparency to the degree that you can legally, and with authenticity. People want to hear from the CEO directly. So there's an element of personal accountability. Timelines need to be committed. And also, they have to convey potential risk to stakeholder groups. Has personal data been exposed? Are people personally at risk, either employees or external groups? So that level of commitment from the CEO and transparency is very important. And then you just really have to lean into the communication to all the groups and be accountable and be accessible. Nobody wants to hear silence in the time of crisis, and people need to know who they can reach out to and how for updates in a timely manner.
Well said. And my next question, Rhea, is how important is storytelling in public relations? And given your vast experience across Asia with so many different cultures, how do you tailor your storytelling and strategies across multiple cultures?
Well, storytelling is the heart of everything we do.
Correct.
When it comes to building a brand, you have to tell a story, and it has to have an emotional connection with your audiences in order for it to resonate with them and for them to feel connected to either the company, the product, the brand, or what you're trying to achieve. So when telling stories across multiple cultures, there's never a one size fits all. And trying to direct a single story across multiple cultures, let's say from a home base or a headquarter office in New York or San Francisco, or in my case from Vancouver, and pushing that out globally, can only be done with local market intel. You need local spokespeople. You need advisors to inform you about cultural nuances, languages, customs, practices. A particular character might be relevant in a North American setting, and it might be quite insulting to an Asian audience. So I think it's so important to have local market knowledge and to be represented by people locally so that there is a connection, and to make sure that the story that you're telling is authentic. Is it truly a reflection of your company and the values that you stand for and your mission? Because authenticity is something that people can see through so clearly. And if it's not in keeping with your brand, if it's off brand, it can really go sideways very quickly.
Well said. My next question is on technology and, the big buzzword in the world, artificial intelligence, chat
Oh,
GPT.
yes.
How do you see the role of AI and technology shaping the future of PR?
Well, I think it's important to think about the positives for artificial intelligence, of which there are many when it comes to communications. First of all, once we launch communications into the market, it will help us to determine the success of that program. Data analytics is a huge component of communications now. We never used to have access to data to understand how our programs are resonating. But because they're all launched on different digital platforms, AI helps us to assess and monitor the uptake of our products and are people engaging with our content, and for how long, and in which demographic, and in which age group, which culture. We can nail it down to a very specific profile so that we understand whether or not the messaging that we're putting out is hitting the mark. And if it's not, then we can segue into a different format or a different story so that we can get it right. So I think data analytics is a huge benefit from AI, and we'll be able to even have better understanding of people's needs and wants so that we can address those appropriately. I think media monitoring is also a huge component of crisis and issues management in particular, so that people aren't caught off guard with a discussion that's all of a sudden explodes on X, for example. Artificial intelligence and media monitoring data analytics will help identify those kind of risks far earlier so that companies are better prepared and can get on top of their communications in a more timely manner. So I think that's very positive. And I think it, in terms of people's writing skills, let's be honest, it can improve the quality of writing. And I think that, and it can also improve the quality of writing for multiple platforms. If you want something in the voice of, a storytelling for Instagram is very different than it is for LinkedIn. So I think that it can help customize content and in some cases improve the quality of writing.
Well said. There is another aspect of PR which I've often debated with many people, is that how do you balance the need for transparency with the requirement to protect sensitive company information?
I think this is founded in your corporate values. If people have clearly defined values and a mission statement to which they which guides their business and their communication, it's important to root everything in that assessment. Transparency is clearly very important, and it builds trust with your stakeholder groups. If you're not transparent, if you're not communicative, the cycle of trust is broken, and it's very hard to regain with stakeholders once the cycle of trust is broken. So I think cybersecurity is a perfect example of that. If there was a breach, does a company try to cover it up, or do they inform potential stakeholders that their information may be at risk, that their credit profile may be compromised? It's important to get out ahead of that communication and prioritize your stakeholder groups over and above what you might think be a short-term financial gain or hit. So I think that transparency when it comes to issues of trust with your stakeholder group is incredibly important. And companies have to remember the values on which they are founded and adhere to those values in those very challenging moments.
Very well said. There's another aspect that I've often thought about. When I was growing up in my early days of my career, people always said, and technology was not so easily accessible, they always said, release bad news on a Friday and good news on a Monday.
Yes.
But my question to you is, what role does ethics play in PR? And how do you navigate ethical dilemmas?
The problem with, well, the challenge, shall we say, it's,
Mm,
it can be a positive and a negative. So the challenge of having this digital world is that nothing good, Friday versus a Monday morning is irrelevant anymore because
absolutely.
news is instant.
Correct.
So whether there's no way to bury bad news
Mm,
anymore.
mm,
And I think the ethics behind communication is still black and white in terms of building trust with your stakeholders and communicating challenging messaging to them.
mm,
We've been through, Ashutosh, so many cycles of the economy.
mm.
We lived in Indonesia during a financial crisis and the fall of Suharto and that dictatorship. And we've seen different communities in crisis.
Mm,
It takes a very strong leader to communicate and build trust with people during a time of crisis.
mm.
And that comes down to personal accountability. That
Right.
is standing up in front of your stakeholders in difficult times and being transparent. That's the harder path to take, but it builds trust with stakeholders, and that trust will carry your business far further than trying to bury the news on a
Mm.
Friday afternoon, hoping that people have checked out for the
Correct.
weekend.
Correct. So two more questions relating to PR, and then I want to move to another segment for investor relations. This is the world of startups and startup entrepreneurs, small businesses. How do you, in your company, approach PR for startups and small businesses differently than for established corporations?
It's surprising, Ashutosh. I don't actually approach the two scenarios differently
Okay.
because in this digital world,
Mm,
everybody has to have the fundamental digital tools in place and the
mm,
digital channels up and running in order
mm,
to do business
mm,
effectively.
mm,
Whether you're a global company with 50,000 employees around the world, or you're a startup in your garage with 5 friends starting a new
mm,
business,
mm,
you still have to have, number one, a website that is on a stable platform that is clear, concise, and conveys all the necessary information about your company, the
mm,
founders, the products and services,
mm,
and how to reach you. So number one is a clear and concise, strong website.
mm.
Everybody has to have that because if you Google a company and they don't have a website, it doesn't look good.
Correct.
And then secondly, you have to have digital channels. So it depends on the business that you're in, whether or not, LinkedIn, is it Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, YouTube,
Mm,
TikTok? There's a myriad of channels, and we help our clients determine what are the appropriate ones for them to be on. It's always a multi-channel platform that's necessary in order to reach stakeholders, but you have to be on those channels and you have to have clear, concise information that's regularly updated and refreshed so that when people come back and visit your site, there's something new and engaging for them.
mm,
So even though, there's huge disparity between a 5-person company and a 50,000 global company, they still need those fundamental tools
mm,
of communication in order to run businesses effectively.
mm. Well said. One more question, and I wanted to ask your perspective on what would your strategy be for dealing with negative press?
I think you have to assess what the negative press contains. I think number one, from my standpoint as a communicator, is it factually accurate or is it false information?
Mm,
If it's information that's factually inaccurate, correcting that information with either the journalist or the publication is a first step. If it is, on your social media and it's negative press in terms of a troll who is just posting negative commentary, I think doing a bit of research and to find out the profile of that person.
mm,
Is this a person who's never going to be satisfied, who's just looking to create problems for companies online? And in those instances, when they aren't credible or when they don't warrant a response,
mm,
saying nothing and not engaging those people is the best way forward because they'll never be satisfied with any response that you provide, and engaging them can bring more life to a situation that just doesn't deserve it.
mm.
If it is a legitimate criticism, engaging with the person offline directly is a more effective way than trying
Right.
to have an online conversation back and forth. So again, meeting that person eye to eye and having a discussion about what their concerns may be or how you can help them to solve a problem that they may be frustrated. They can't get through to a call center and speak to a real person. Well, let us help you and let's solve that problem for you.
Yeah.
So negative press comes in very many forms, and I think it's a matter of assessing the degree to which it's accurate or not, and then the degree of severity. And is it a person who is reasonable and can be helped, or is it a troll who's just looking to create more problems online and bring negative attention?
Amazing. Thank you. So, I want to now talk a little bit about investor relations. And I always used to marvel when we were colleagues at how you handle public relations and investor relations. And they're quite different in my own understanding. My first question is, what are some of the key elements, Rhea, of a successful investor relations strategy? And I know you've handled investors not just from one country, but across several countries.
Well, I would start by full disclosure. I don't have an MBA. I wouldn't qualify myself as pure investor relations by some of the Fortune 500 companies. I would more broadly classify my skill set as financial communications.
Okay.
And what I always strive to do was to provide access to the appropriate resources from within our company that some of the analysts for example, on Wall Street who are covering our stock needed at the time, or access to the CFO and the CFO's team. I'm not, have never been in a position of being a CFO, so I don't have that degree of mathematical capability. But financial communications, very similar to public relations, is all about access to information and updating markets in a timely and transparent method, even when sometimes the news is not so great, which is always harder to do. And then also preparing the leaders, for example, preparing your CFO to go into those earnings calls if the message is going to be challenged, or if it's not great results that may come as a surprise to the market. That kind of level of preparation is essential for FAQs and question and answers, and practicing those scenarios so that when the CFO goes in to lead those financial discussions, they're well equipped, they're well prepared, and have practiced and are not going to be flustered by aggressive questions from analysts who are surprised by some less than stellar results.
Well said. So I have time for two more questions in our conversation today. How important is ESG, the new buzzword in the last few years across the whole world? How important is ESG in today's investor relations?
ESG is definitely a buzzword, but I think the fundamentals of it are so important for how businesses operate going forward. The number one priority that I counsel my clients about ESG is for it to be authentic. I have journalists who, have watched, for example, companies make a pledge to Black Lives Matter in the US, and then return to those companies 1 year later and say, what have you done since making that pledge 1 year ago? There's a huge degree of expectation and accountability in the market now. So it's not just a matter of putting up some values that are aligned with the ESG protocols on your website, or for, citing, we have, certain gender equality on our board. It's so much more than that. People have to authentically live the values that they purport to believe in, and that are posted on their website, and make sure that they are actually moving the dial legitimately in those areas as the years go by, so that it's not just checking a box. I do think the principles of it are essential to having a balanced approach to business going forward. But I do have to constantly remind companies that it's not just about checking the box. You actually have to implement the policies and procedures.
Very well said. Rhea, we've run out of time, but on that note, thank you so much for speaking to me. It was fantastic to get introduced to you after so many years. Thank you for speaking to me about so many different aspects of public relations, about challenges, about technology in public relations. I loved your response on how to deal with negative press, I also loved what you said about how important it is to be able to respond quickly when there are challenges that you face. Thank you also for talking to me about investor relations. Thank you again and good luck.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. I really appreciate our time together and wonderful to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.